This is the Todd Shapiro Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.
All right, the CEO, this is a nice surprise of Halo Labs at Halo Labs Inc. Give him a follow and give him a follow too now on Twitter. Kiran Sidhu. Hi, Kiran.
Hi, Todd. How are you?
Good, man. That was a nice, pleasant surprise, dude.
So it's been a long time since we've spoken.
You've set up your account on Twitter recently, and you're having a lot of fun with it, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm having fun. I've never done this, and I think it's really cool to diarize for investors because they keep pinging me and just people who are interested in the space, just sort of the days in a life, and without making comment on, much, how do I say it, much stuff that isn't sort of disclosable or this or that, just actually diarizing, what I'm doing and where I am and all the sort of interesting peculiarities of this business, because I have definitely, I've spent time in online gambling, I've spent time in e-money, but I've never, ever seen anything like cannabis before. It's definitely a very special business, especially in the United States.
Well, if people haven't been following your last few days on Twitter since you joined, Kiran Sidhu, CEO, is where you can find him. Well, what would like a day in the life of a CEO be? That's a great point you make. That people want to know that their CEOs are active and doing things if you invest in a company.
Right. And so I have a mantra right now, with all this sort of vape crisis and stock market disarray in cannabis, and my mantra to the whole team at Halo is ABC, always be closing, right? So if I'm not out on the road trying to close myself, then I'm not leading from the front, So I'm a firm believer in sort of the Patton-esque view of life, get on top of that tank and lead it down the road. And so that brought me this morning really early, a 6:30 a.m. flight to Sacramento. And, we're trying to figure out how we get a lot of momentum behind dab tabs. And so we thought to ourselves, look, if we can convince this great company called Connected, who, makes the highest of high-end cannabis in California, to sort of, collaborate with us on dab tabs, it would really, really help the brand, because their brands, with their they have such cool strains, and their product sells for so much more, and they have such strong brand recognition. Said, why don't we see if we could do something with them? So we set up a meeting and spent the morning with them. And of course, in all great meetings like this, they always give you a parting gift. So this time I got some hemp pre-rolls that smell and taste just like cannabis, and obviously went down to the store and had to buy some of their famous Alien Labs cannabis, and and then went off to lunch, and given all these fires around here in California, there's even rolling blackouts in Sacramento, so it took a little while to find a lunch place, but the blackouts have subsided, and it's always one thing or another.
Well, what is the mood of the public side of cannabis in the United States beyond Halo? What's the overall mood from whether it's people right within the industry, like you said, have been doing this for quite some time, to just your retail investor?
Well, what I'm beginning to realize is they're the haves and the have-nots, right? So they're guys who actually in California, like, these guys up here, they're old school. They've been in the business since the medical days, and they've really dialed in a really good business, right? And their brands have stood the test of time. And it was the same thing down when I was in San Diego Friday visiting with Rezwan Khan at DNA Genetics, the great smokeout, as I call it. And, DNA Genetics, what a great brand. Canopy licenses it. And you all in Canada know it, because when I walk into a dispensary, everyone's flower is 666, DNA Genetics, 36, 666. And they've just done a brilliant job, and we're going to try to do some collaborations with them. And then you walk into Urban Leaf, and, Urban Leaf is by far that San Diego store is arguably one of the top 3 or 4 dispensaries in the United States, but definitely one of the top dispensaries in California. And then everything wasn't all roses. The dab tabs, because we used what weren't taking off because people didn't know how to use them. And so, everything isn't always, roses. So we had to sit there and talk to them, senior level to senior level, about how we retool the dab tabs, how we reintroduce it, how we educate people around it, so there's, this is the way the business is. You're in a new business, you're introducing a new technology. You gotta, sometimes it's not going to take, and you gotta pull it back and then redo it.
Kiran Sidhu from Halo Labs. I saw a study the other day, Kiran, that said 2 out of 3 Americans favor legalization cannabis. I think there's something like 33 U.S. states that have legalized medical or recreational to some point. And yet there seems to be a bit of a standstill going on right now. What's the pulse on that? What are, the have-nots, but what are ultimately people saying, regardless of stock, of public, of this or that? Why aren't any administrations making any sort of movements here, in your opinion?
Well, it was really interesting. And so, when I was with Rez, who's part of this big initiative in Washington, he's a lawyer. And, one of the founders of DNA Genetics, one of the founders of Urban Leaf, one of the founders of Seedless. I mean, he's like an industry icon. And when I was with him, he's been working on the safe harbor bill. And I remember when we were having breakfast and I was going to put my card out. And I'm like, Rez, after 30 years, I lost my personal bank accounts at Bank of America, right, because I'm involved in the cannabis industry. And he put his arms around me and he said, brother, he said, by March, I promise you we'll get safe harbor passed. I think we got it there. We made the accommodations for the Republican Senate. We made a bunch of accommodations. And I'm fairly confident that we'll get that safe harbor done for you. And people who, walk in your footsteps aren't going to have this horrible issue of, oh, my God, you're a CEO of a cannabis company. Oh, my God, you're getting paychecks or you're getting money from a cannabis company and, your bank accounts after 30 years. And I was a Merrill Lynch employee. I was a senior vice president in M&A, But these are the trials and tribulations that, we go through that people don't understand. And it's not only your bank accounts. Like all my credit cards were with Bank of America, too. My kids' college accounts, right? So, so this is the stuff you don't see in Canada, but we go through on a daily basis in America.
And of course, the Safe Banking Act, meaning that it doesn't only have to be a cash industry. Is that also weird, being involved in many different sectors in your day to just deal strictly with cash?
It is really bizarre. It is like yesterday, Andreas met my co-founder. He was going from Medford, Oregon, to Cathedral City, California, and we can't transfer in between our banks state to state because we're crossing a state line, but we can transfer cash. So Andrea said, "Hey, I'm going to save $1,500 in a courier." I said, "How?" He said, "I'm just going to put $40,000 in my bag and fly it down to Cathedral City." And I thought to myself, I said, well, you can do that. He has the note. He has everything. I personally wouldn't do it, but he's like, look, I'm just going to fly it down and save $1,500. I said, all the more power to you, But these are like sort of the realities that we deal with every day. We have this sort of quasi world we live in where we have the states have rights and we have these cannabis businesses, but we're dealing with a business that is federally illegal. And, even our taxes, we're taxed under this tax regime called the 280E. And that's known in slang as the Capone tax. It was a tax that the government put in to catch Al Capone in the day. And so we're taxed on our gross profits. When they find out we're involved in the cannabis industry, unless we're banking at a local savings and loan, our personal accounts get shut down and we have to transfer cash in between states because we can't transfer money. And it's definitely living in a twilight zone.
Safe to say, though, that obviously you're running Halo Labs, of course, to be a profitable and very successful company. But it sounds, with the risks you're taking, legal risks that you're taking, that there's a huge passion here for you too, isn't there, Kiran? And I know you away from it, so they're like you're really passionate about this.
Oh, absolutely, because, it goes back to my grandfather in India, who was a medical marijuana researcher. I mean, it's really, this is good for you. I don't mean anything in excess isn't good for you, right? But, this has medical efficacy. Alcohol does not have medical efficacy. Alcohol does not help you sleep. It impairs your sleep, right? It kills your liver. Obviously, if you're sitting there vaping all the time or smoking all the time, you're going to kill your lungs. There are obviously side effects, but there's medicinal use. I mean, people who have chemotherapy, people who have PTSD, people who have, who've suffered from, different ailments. There's definitely, we're definitely onto something here. And we sort of missed the last 100 years of cannabis due to this prohibition that we've been under. And I'm glad to see that, times are changing.
Kiran Sidhu, what's next then for you and the company over at Halo Labs?
Yep.
Did you lose me there?
No, I got you.
Oh, sorry.
I there was a little, I mean, so, this afternoon I saw, so when you look at, this afternoon I saw a really cool business too. It's, called Vibe. They're a little Canadian public company, and their dispensaries are small. They have like one in Stockton and one in Sacramento, and they're not in glamorous places, but nice small footprints, and they seem to be doing some good business, and like Connected, not huge grows, but they have their own small little grow that services their dispensaries. And it shows you that, at all sort of levels in the chain, there's room for people, right? And I view the same thing in Canada, even though you have these massive LPs, because you got, companies like High Tide that have dispensaries, and you have, forgot the name of it, but Flower and Ice. You've got other guys who are sort of not these massive, massive LPs, but they're finding their sort of ground and, finding their niches in the business, which I think is really cool, So even amongst the titans, there's room for the minnows, so to speak.
Yeah, and with the minnows, you think of, I don't know if it's a good or bad comparison, but, there's convenience stores and then there's big grocery chains. Like at some day, there's customers to cater to, I would imagine.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Because, who wants to go, if you know that you're going to get your pre-rolls for the weekend or whatever you want to go into a place where you can quickly get in and out. And some of these big dispensaries like Neta and, Massachusetts, which is arguably the largest dispensary in the United States, and Urban Leaf, and some of these bigger guys, it takes a while to get in and out, right? And that's part of that concept of our dispensary track software. So people can pre-book in the larger spaces. But besides those, to have sort of this concept of like a deli or an AM PM to come in and out really quickly, grab your milk and go or grab your pre-rolls and go is definitely, taking hold as I travel around the United States, as I travel to Oregon. Nevada, they tend to be larger dispensaries because there are fewer licenses. But Oregon, you got, like 600 dispensaries. In California, now you got probably around 600 dispensaries, somewhere between 500 to 600 that are licensed. And so you're getting to see all these different formats, which is really cool.
Kiran, on the Canadian side of things, we've been hearing and even read some articles that some dispensaries have too much supply to the fact where they just kind of burn it and get rid of it, basically, based on the rollout and the what most would say is an unsuccessful rollout over the last year and a little bit. Would that ever be the case for like a Halo Labs? Is there ever too much supply?
Definitely, and we saw that in Oregon. I mean, we have this saying that, if you can survive in Oregon, you could survive anywhere, because Oregon had a very loose system where they basically issued licenses to anyone provided, didn't commit a crime. And, it was a very loose licensing regime. So it tended to create a glut in the market. It tended to create a lot of diversion into the black market. And what ended up happening with that was that they re-rationalized it. So within a year, you started to see constriction in the market. You started to see a lot of growers shift over to hemp. Now you have a glut in the hemp market. But, Oregon is sort of stabilized. And then obviously to shake the tree again, they, imposed these very draconian, the vape measures where they effectively banned anything except for cannabis derived, right? And that shook the tree again. So you're going to see another shakeout, I bet, in a state as tight as Oregon, where you have, wonderful marijuana and a beautiful climate to grow it, but you had an oversupply, and now it's starting to balance out again.
Is one of your goals then, Kiran, to be one of the largest companies in Oregon?
We are the largest, I'd say.
Wow.
Probably the second largest, behind a really great company called Cura or Select. That's actually run by a friend of mine, Nitin Khanna. And, they focused on vapes, which are now banned, except for cannabis derived. We focus more on concentrates, but you can't, the vapes are so convenient, you can't not carry them. So now everyone's scrambling now to basically steam cannabis to get terpenes to flavor their cartridges naturally, which should have been the way we did it in the first place, as opposed to botanically. And, the one thing we have behind us is our grows. So it was a great growing season. So we have a lot of cannabis to sort of steam terpenes off of.
What makes Oregon such a progressive state? And I ask that because I even see that they're sort of in line to maybe becoming the next to decriminalize some psychedelics and things like that. They seem, to me that's so interesting that that all comes together.
Oregon has this sort of, I don't know how to say it, sort of this libertarian view. So, you have these pockets of Republicans and you have these pockets of Democrats, but everyone seems to have this libertarian streak in them in Oregon, what I've noticed. And this is maybe an overgeneralization, but they seem to be, sort of like, don't tread on me, sort of let me choose what's right for me. It seems to be an ethos in Oregon, and I think that's made it quite progressive. And Oregon has set up really a really good marijuana regime where you don't have these onerous taxes, where you're able to compete with the black market quite cost effectively because the state isn't taxing you to death. Where other states just tax and tax and tax. They tax, the cultivation, they tax the manufacturing. And then they even tax it. Oregon, the one thing Oregon did put in was the first ever sales tax, which was for marijuana. But they don't have taxes at every level of the chain, so to speak.
Kiran, my last question today, and Kiran Sidhu from Halo Labs, at Invest Halo Labs on Instagram and at Kiran Sidhu CEO on Twitter, and Halo Labs Inc. as well on Twitter. You even just knowing you and working with you and following you now and listening to you talk here on the program, you have a very nice way of sort of talking about competitors and the industry as a whole. And I think that's a really interesting thing to promote and inspiring as an entrepreneur myself, where there doesn't seem to be this like put down the competitors, put down others. And you're really trying to lift all these companies together. Is that an approach that's unique to you, or do you find that's within the sector?
No, it's definitely within the sector, because this sector, at least in America, has this sort of us against the machine mentality, because the issue is that no matter how much you progress, you're always collectively, be it through the vape crisis, through bad actors, through other issues, you're almost always sort of getting punched. And when you get punched, you tend to sort of coalesce as an industry. So like in Oregon, there are three of us that are really big. There's ourselves, Halo, there's Select, and there's Buddies. And even though we're fierce competitors, the minute the vape crisis came up, we all sort of pulled together, right? So we all pulled together and we, rallied around the flag and spoke to one another and, tried to work with the government to come up with effective standards that would address public safety, right? So, and that's a little bit, I think, different from this business than other businesses, right? Where with other established businesses, you don't have as much sort of regulatory uncertainty, and that pulls us all together, right? In a sense and that's why we all work closely together. And as the market grows, a high tide lifts all boats. We all tend to prosper, even though we, as competitors, we compete fiercely with one another.
Where are things with the vape crisis right now?
Well, I listened to a podcast today, and they're saying that they're that even though we're singling out THC, but I was listening to a New York Times podcast today talking about, I think, like the first case in Nebraska or someplace was just a traditional vape user, right? So obviously, what surprised people is that a lot of people sort of went off cigarettes or joints to vapes thinking that it was safer. And what the reality may be, it may not be, it may be unsafer, right? Or it may be as equally unsafe. And so I think that is a reality that people are sort of coming to grips with, be it THC or be it nicotine. But again, this comes down to this sort of free choice, which again, the Oregon government, despite the libertarian nature of the people, has imposed, where, people, the question is how much choice do you give people versus how much does public health impose? California's taken one view, Massachusetts taken one view, New York's taken a view, Oregon's taken a view. The FDA hasn't come out, right? It'll be interesting to see what Health Canada does eventually with this. This is, again, one of those classic tug-of-wars.
Is there a uniform view on smoking cigarettes in terms of how a federal government in the States or in Canada would approach it? Like, I think there is in Canada here.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. But it took many years. Again, this is something that they were talking about, 1920 to 1960. So it was like after World War II, like 1920 people, started smoking a lot. After World War II, when they came back, there was a lot of smoking. Let's say that's the 1940s. But the Surgeon General didn't implement, according to this podcast, a warning until the 1960s, right? So, now we know, now there's studies showing that, and deaths and everything showing that, vaping isn't the best thing for you. I think that's kind of obvious. Now it's a question of, when will there be a federal response and, what the responses will be. And different countries are viewing it differently. Like, I think the United Kingdom right now hasn't taken sort of this sort of punitive stance that some states have taken. And other states like California have just given people a stern warning, say, buyer beware, right? But eventually, there will be federal legalization, I hope. And there'll definitely be federal regulation. And when all that comes in, only God knows.
Yeah, and listen, that's where I think it has to get to, because the ironic part about all of it is there's still a black market for everything. So why not try and do it the compliant and educational way through legal companies such as yours at Halo Labs? I find these talks so fun and so educational as always, Kiran Sidhu. And please follow him if you want a day in the life of a CEO. And I know Kiran personally, so he is having fun with it too and being quite candid on his Twitter, including showing joints when they're smoked. And they're like, that's a cool guy if I've ever seen one. But
here's the problem. So, this is not a problem, but it's actually an opportunity. When you go, it's almost like in the Far East or the Middle East. You go to a store, the person's going to say, may I offer you some tea? May I offer you, some sweets? And, if you say no, they're going to insist. It's the same thing in the cannabis space.
Yeah.
When you walk into a client or something, they're going to offer you something, right? And you're going to, you got to at least partake a little bit. Otherwise, you're not, they're going to be a little offended, especially when you're trying to get shelf space.
I love it, dude. Well, thank you very much, and we can't wait. Let's catch up next week. We'll find out some company news, find out, I know that Halo Labs is aggressively working on a bunch of different things. Excited to find out down the pipeline what is to come for your shareholders, and we appreciate all the updates.
All right, thanks, Todd.
Okay,
Take care.
Kiran Sidhu, everyone from Halo Labs.
This is the Todd Shapiro Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.